Today I want to talk about the massive rise that Bitcoin Cash has experienced over the last couple of days and why you shouldn't be worried about a flippening where essentially Bitcoin Cash becomes Bitcoin. Because right now people are actually talking about that as if it's going to happen, and the probability that it does happen is basically zero. Now, the largest reason why it's likely not going to happen, and again, I'm removing all politics from this. Personally, I don't think increasing the block size to 8 megabytes even really causes all that much centralization. I think you need to raise it even more than that to see true centralization of the nodes. But that's a totally separate story. I don't really believe in removing SegWit. I think SegWit is just fine, and Bitcoin Cash doesn't have SegWit, but that's all the politics of it. I want to focus on the investing side in this video because regardless of my personal opinion on whether or not Bitcoin Cash is or isn't a better transaction medium than Bitcoin is, it will not replace Bitcoin. And the largest reason why it will never replace Bitcoin is because it cannot, unless they really are able to essentially bribe the exchanges, unless the exchanges start accepting Bitcoin Cash as Bitcoin. In other words, there has to basically be a switch around. And then SegWit 1x Bitcoin has to be basically called something else. And that's just not going to happen unless all of a sudden we see a massive shift in adoption. And we're not going to see that, unfortunately, for those of you that believe in Bitcoin Cash. Again, I don't want to get too much into the politics of it, but it just isn't going to happen realistically. You have to think about this in terms of all of the institutional support is behind Bitcoin, and the branding is behind Bitcoin. Now, I want you to think from the perspective of an exchange. In order for them to replace Bitcoin with Bitcoin Cash and basically shift the branding, all of the exchanges essentially have to make that move at the same time. If they do it one at a time, everybody's going to stop using the exchange that starts. So let's say, for example, they probably are not going to do this, almost certainly not going to do this, because Coinbase has had sort of a mixed position on Bitcoin Cash throughout its lifetime. But let's say, just for instance, that GDAX decides to make Bitcoin Cash the new Bitcoin. And so now this is Bitcoin Cash, but it's called Bitcoin. So anytime you pay $6,400, you're essentially getting this instead of this. If they decided to do that, don't get me wrong, Bitcoin Cash would spike on all exchanges. However, people would stop using GDAX. Or Bitcoin, as it's called on GDAX, would crash to the true value of Bitcoin Cash based on other exchanges. And the transaction volume on GDAX would be pitiful in comparison to what it is now, because they would have lost everybody's trust. They certainly would lose mine if they did something of that nature. So in order for us to see exchanges change the branding around, it would really require essentially all of them to change at once. And the odds that they're all able to work together in order to do that is very slim. This is also a big reason why SegWit 2x likely wasn't going to replace Bitcoin as well. The other element here is that Bitcoin Cash, given that it's likely not going to replace Bitcoin on the exchanges, it's not going to get the Wall Street institutional support. Most Wall Street investors and more institutional investors don't even know about Bitcoin Cash other than it was a hard fork of Bitcoin. A lot of people just see it as inflation of Bitcoin. They actually just think that it basically printed money out of thin air. And as of right now, it is sort of behaving that way. Now, the reason why Bitcoin Cash is going up so much recently is the result of Roger Ver. Basically, okay, so this is not just Roger Ver. There's a number of things that are going on, but let's start off with this. So Roger Ver is now going somewhat on a marketing deal talking about Bitcoin Cash. However, this was to a very small group of people. Let's see if I can actually capture. I mean, this size, this is sort of a, this is not enough to move the markets. But it is sort of a start, and Roger Ver obviously is very important within the Bitcoin community, so he is in fact an influencer of Bitcoin Cash. However, he can't influence Bitcoin Cash this much, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, people have brought this up frequently, is that a lot of the volume is coming from Korea, But what I really want to talk about here is now, as a result of all of this volume coming from Korea, we are now seeing, in addition to that, miners are starting to switch over. Now, the reason miners are switching over is because at this price, Bitcoin Cash is now more profitable to mine than Bitcoin is. And the first video on this channel actually talked about mining oscillations between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. And this website called fork.lol is a phenomenal website for essentially measuring which of the two cryptocurrencies is more profitable or better for miners. And so the way you should read this chart is essentially they have this proprietary way of saying, you know, is this more rewarding or less rewarding than the other cryptocurrency? So this purple line here is Bitcoin Cash, and the orange line is Bitcoin. And it's basically, imagine that it's looking at the reward proposition for both of them. And you can see that recently, Bitcoin Cash, as a result of the increase of its market value, has now become more profitable to mine. Part of the reason that miners are so much more bullish on Bitcoin Cash now is because on November 13th, just 2 days from now, Bitcoin Cash is anticipated to upgrade its network. And the biggest change is going to be to the emergency difficulty adjustment parameter, which in my opinion was awful before. I mean, it really led to some really strong feedback loops between hashing rate and difficulty between the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash network. Well, now they're going to use a totally different algorithm, and hopefully they tested a couple of different proposals. The hope here is that the emergency difficulty adjustment is going to be much less volatile, and as a result of that, we are going to see a much more stable hashing rate and difficulty on the Bitcoin Cash network than we saw back in August, and even now we're still seeing some fluctuations. So that's the big catalyst. We're going to see a big upgrade to the Bitcoin Cash network on November 13th, and it's going to hopefully be a lot more stable. As a result of that, miners are a lot more bullish. Plus, at the moment, Bitcoin Cash is more profitable to mine, and we should see some interesting changes now that the emergency difficulty adjustment is going to get changed to be a little less over-responsive like it was before. We are now going to see Bitcoin Cash essentially be mined all the way up until we see the difficulty increase. You can see the difficulty is this dotted line all the way down here, and you can see that the Bitcoin difficulty is all the way up here. As a result of that, it's much more difficult to find blocks on Bitcoin than it is for Bitcoin Cash, and furthermore, that reduces the profitability for Bitcoin. Now, the big reason everybody likes to talk about Bitcoin Cash as being a better Bitcoin is the fact that the transaction fee is so small relative to Bitcoin. If you see this here, you can see, especially now, we are seeing the fees for Bitcoin go back up to those multi-dollar levels. Now, what we want to see with Bitcoin is eventually these transaction fees to go down. But the argument here is that as long as Bitcoin Cash has these low transaction fees, eventually we're going to see people transition from Bitcoin over to Bitcoin Cash. And as a result of that, we are going to see a flippening, and Bitcoin Cash will become the new Bitcoin. Now, the reason this is not going to happen as well is that we've already established on this channel that the value of Bitcoin is no longer coming from the transaction volume. We mentioned that Bitcoin has gone up tenfold in the past year, yet the actual transaction volume for Bitcoin has been relatively flat. Now, a lot of people brought up the fact that it's at maximum capacity, so of course it can't increase further. But if we look at the mempool, the base level of the mempool really hasn't done much over the past year. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar, the mempool is essentially the stored transactions that are waiting to be placed into blocks and confirmed onto the blockchain, right? So these are basically pending transactions is a way you can think of it. And right now, we are seeing over the past year or so, aside from a few spikes here and there, and we're going to talk about those in a moment, especially because we're spiking at the moment, the mempool size has really sort of been stable around these lower areas down here, and at multiple times is at 0 bytes. Right now, we're seeing the mempool spike. And the reason we see the mempool spike like here and here and here and here is the result of spam transactions. In other words, they're not real transactions. They're not actually people using Bitcoin or any other particular cryptocurrency if you look at other mempools. These spam transactions are not real. They're just there to essentially send a message or increase transaction fees so that Bitcoin becomes inconvenient to use. Now, this just so happened to coincide with the massive increase in the value of Bitcoin Cash. In other words, I actually don't think it is disconnected. I have a feeling that these two facts, the fact that we're seeing Bitcoin Cash rise like it is right now, and the fact that we're seeing the Bitcoin mempool size increase like it is, and therefore increase the transaction fees, as you can see here, is all intentional. In other words, it's not just a coincidence. And as a result of that, I just want to be clear with everybody that this is being manipulated at the moment, at least in my opinion. Bitcoin Cash is being manipulated right now. We might see more of a pump, but I would say stay away at all costs, because right now, Bitcoin Cash might be doing well, but in the long term, this cryptocurrency, in my opinion, it's a worse Litecoin, in my opinion. That's what Bitcoin Cash really boils down to being. Unless it replaced Bitcoin, it's a worse Litecoin. Now, again, the reason why that is because the branding behind Bitcoin, everybody in Wall Street knows what Bitcoin is. Mom, Pa, the few of them that do know about cryptocurrencies, they know about Bitcoin. They do not know about Ethereum even. And that's the second largest cryptocurrency. They don't know about Ripple. They don't know about Litecoin. They don't know about Bitcoin Cash. They don't know about any of these other cryptocurrencies. Most casual investors really only know about Bitcoin. And even the casual people that just sort of have a very loose interest in cryptocurrencies, they basically know two words: Bitcoin and blockchain. And that's it. They don't know any of these other cryptocurrencies. So I just want everybody to realize that before they make the decision here that Bitcoin Cash is going to replace Bitcoin. It's not going to do that. It would take a concerted effort from the exchanges to see that happen. And if we compare Bitcoin Cash to Litecoin, because that's really the true aim of Bitcoin Cash, is to essentially become a better transaction medium than Bitcoin. Well, let's compare it to Litecoin, because I just established I really don't see it ever replacing Bitcoin. If we compare Bitcoin Cash versus Litecoin, we'll see here that Litecoin has actually done fairly well at keeping its transaction fees fairly low, just like Bitcoin Cash. In addition to that, Litecoin also has had, for the majority of Bitcoin Cash's life cycle, higher transaction volume. Now, the reason why Bitcoin Cash transaction volume is increasing so much is likely not even the result of it being used to purchase goods and services, but rather to send it between exchanges, which of course is not real adoption. It's not really using it as a transaction medium or for sending your friends money or family money. Really right now, I would say the majority of the transaction volume increase that we're seeing in Bitcoin Cash here just so happens to be the result of the fact that price is going up. So people are actually moving it between exchanges a little bit more. The other possibility, of course, is that there's spam transactions on the Bitcoin Cash network as well to make it seem as though it is starting to see higher adoption. Again, I think this is all smoke and mirrors. And as a result of that, I would really encourage everybody to be cautious when it comes to investing in Bitcoin Cash. I don't think this is going to end well. I certainly don't think that it should be larger than Litecoin in the long term, because Litecoin essentially does what Bitcoin Cash does, except it's been around longer, it has more community support, and it also, in my opinion, has a better team behind it. So I just want to point that out to everybody. If you're investing right now, I would stay away from Bitcoin Cash at all costs, unless you really, really believe in it. But even then, I would say, listen, in order for this to happen, all of the different exchanges would have to work together to basically replace Bitcoin with Bitcoin Cash. And that's just not going to happen. The exchanges are not going to be able to coordinate that well, and they're not going to make the move by themselves, because then they risk reducing their overall transaction volume as they reduce their trust or faith with customers. I hope you all enjoyed the video. As usual, if you would like to support me and the channel, there's some affiliate links for Amazon in the description, all for products that I actually use, hardware wallets, books that I recommend, as well as for exchanges that I actually like to use, including GDAX, of course. If you use any of the Amazon affiliate links, I get a small piece of compensation, even if you don't buy the exact item that I have linked there. So check those out if you're interested. Otherwise, leave a like, comment, and subscription, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.